Would everyone take a seat? We're going to get started in 120 seconds. Okay, sounds good. Buenas tardes. Masaya Haiti. Wuan. Bon après-midi. Kelo Puyuma. Chana Wema. Chao Buechio. Konnichiwa. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Alfred Tatum, and I'm the president-elect of LRA, as well as the 2023 conference chair. On behalf of our president, Doris Dalhouse, our past presidents, the board of directors, and our literacy elders who grew this into a fine literacy organization, may I be the first to officially welcome you to the 73rd annual meeting of the Literacy Research Association. It is great to be here with you in Atlanta. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Star Fellow and Mentor introductions, the Student Outstanding Research Award presentation, the Albert J. Kingston Award, and the 2023 presidential address that will be delivered by Doris Walker Dalhouse. As we continue to engage in what I anticipate will be a stimulating and thought-provoking conference for all present and under the sound of my voice, it is important to acknowledge that beginning with the forced removal of indigenous people and continuing through the implementation of anti-Black public policies and redevelopment practices, Atlanta is no stranger to the displacement of indigenous people and the destruction of African American communities. The Literacy Research Association's 73rd Annual Conference is located on the traditional homelands of the Muskegee Creek and Cherokee peoples who were displaced through violence and governmental policies. Atlanta was built on top of thriving trade routes and was home to ceremonial grounds. We must also acknowledge that the culture, economic growth, and development upon this land are indebted to the labor of enslaved African people, the deep-rooted wounds of colonization, slavery, Jim Crow, and rampant white supremacy have left indelible effects on the African American and indigenous communities. Few announcements. Please consider submitting your conference papers to LRTMP. That deadline is February 10th, 2024. Your research is critical to building a humanitarian research architecture that shatters hierarchies and contributes to the expansion of our fields. Following this event, please join our President's reception immediately following in the Galleria on the lower level of the hotel. Let's pack that room and celebrate our President. Vital Issues will be hosted at the hotel lobby bar after dinner tonight. If you've never attended Vital Issues and you're a new member, you do not want to miss this. This is a staple that allows us to meet and mingle with our community and witness strong and emerging commitments to ideas, ideals, and issues. It has been my pleasure to serve as this year's conference chair. As you might imagine, pulling off a 4-day in-person event during these uncertain times, which features over 560 in-person presentations and is attended by close to 900 people, close friends that is, requires a league of generous colleagues and devoted professionals. Let me just take a few moments to introduce you to those who have been behind the scenes doing all of the work. First, I must thank our 2023 conference co-chair and vice president of LRA, Dr. Fenice Boyd. As well, you were invaluable, Fenice. It was just a joy to work with you. As well as members of the LRA Executive Committee and Board of Directors. Fenice and I cannot thank enough our new and fabulous management team, Jody, Nicolette, Laura, and Adriana. Will you please stand so they can see who you are? If you have called or emailed headquarters, these are the individuals who have taken care of you. They are also here to help you at the conference desk. Please, please stop by and thank them. This is their introduction to the LRA community. And if you will, bring in some coffee and some chips. I had to check on them today and say, are you taking care of yourself? They were worried about taking care of us, so we really appreciate you and your presence and all of your work tonight. Finally, I want to thank you for submitting your research, the reviewers for providing thoughtful feedback, the chairs and discussants for organizing and stimulating session conversations, and the area chairs for overseeing the review process. Area chairs, please stand and remain standing as I call your area. I would like to especially recognize the outgoing area chairs for your service as area chairs and your commitment to LRA. So will those from areas 1 through 3 please stand if you're here? Areas 4 through 6. All right. Areas 7 through 9. Areas 10 through 12. All right. And areas 13 and 14. Thank you, thank you, thank you again for your wonderful service to the organization. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Arlette Willis and Young Kim, Director and Co-Director of the Star Fellows Program, who will introduce the Star Fellows and mentors.
All right. I'm Jung Kim, and I had the great opportunity to chair the STAR cohort, or the STAR program, alongside Arlette Willis. It's been an absolute joy. These are some amazing scholars that have come forward. My notes are not my notes weren't coming up on the teleprompter, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep talking. The Scholars of Color Transitioning into Academic Research Institutions, known as STAR, is a mentoring program that promotes excellence and high-quality literacy-related research that addresses issues and opportunities related to diversity. The fellowship supports historically underrepresented early career scholars of color. Sorry, the teleprompter is moving slowly. So I'm going to bring my lovely STAR Fellows up to the front. And so first we have Marcus Kroom, who was mentored by Patricia Edwards. Oh. It's authentic. Okay. Up next, we have, who's not with us today, but Tala Carker Esprat, who was mentored by Pamela Mason. Up next, we have, there's a spelling error, but it should be Jin Kyung Jung, who's mentored by Vaughn Watson. Up next, we have Chung Min Kwan, who was mentored by Wanshun Eva Lam. We have Jason Mizell, who was mentored by Aria Rosvar. Rosa Nam is also not with us tonight, but she was mentored by Yu Kyung Sung. And then we have Lakia, she just recently got married, so Alafalu, mentored by Patrianne Smith. And then finally, but not least, Crystal Wise, who was mentored by Menica Brooks. That's it. Thank you so much. And up next, we have Judd Lofter with the Student Outstanding Research Award.
I didn't know we could have notes down here. That'd be fun. I wish to publicly thank the SOAR committee for their time and effort in encouraging and developing our students' scholars. Their commitment to the future of the field is evident and much appreciated. This year, the committee included the following members: Doug Fisher, Kwanguk Sung, Debbie Rowe, Tara Brooke, Lakia, apparently just got married, Alafalu, James Chisholm, and Eric Quast, and then rolling off after 3 years of impeccable service, Monica Gonzalez Ibarra, Rosina Zamora Luz, Zoe Traga Filipakos, and Alicia Gale. I am happy to buy each one of you a drink, either at the presidential reception or at Vital Issues later this evening. As you can see, we need 4 new members, so if any of y'all want to be among the cool kids, sign up. This year's winning manuscript illustrates the poetic, catalytic, and ideological function of aesthetic forms that youth drew on to interrogate non-neutral digital texts. And I'm going to read that again just for the jouissance of the words combined in that sentence. This year's winning manuscript, jouissance, you can use that, right? It's LRA. This year's winning manuscript illustrates the poetic, catalytic, and ideological function of aesthetic forms that youth drew on to interrogate non-neutral digital texts. Careful microethnographic analyses of interviews, think-alouds, talk, and writing demonstrate how queer youth of color and allies critically interpreted digital texts. This work provides researchers and teachers a framework to address disinformation, fake news, and oppressive learning. And if you don't think we need more of that. Further, the author conceptualizes an innovative and holistic approach to English language arts teaching that folds in literacy analysis, reading comprehension, composition, canonical and digital text, and social justice and activism. The research emphasizes the critical processes youth use to deconstruct a variety of texts and how they situate those understandings within larger socio-political contexts. This is important and, in some states, illegal work. During a continued era of misinformation and censorship, this year's SORA winner is Scott Storm.
Thank you, Judd, and congratulations again, Scott. Now I'd like to introduce Rachel Karchmer-Klein, past recipient of the Albert J. Kingston Award, to present this year's award. Rachel?
I need the clicker. Thank you. All right. The Albert J. Kingston Service Award recognizes individual members of LRA for distinguished contributions of service to the organization. This notable honor has been presented annually since 1985. Our chair, Sharon Mulpole, was not able to be here today, so I am honored to be the person who is able to give this award today. I'm fortunate in that I've known this person since the beginning of her higher ed career and work with LRA, so this was an especially fun presentation to put together. I'm gonna hopefully not ruin it for anyone and go slowly. I also find it a huge honor to tell a portion of this recipient's story so that you can see how a member of this organization has dedicated a large portion of their time and effort to its well-being while also balancing their university's responsibilities, as well as the most important aspect, their personal life. So as you think about your dedication and your thought about how you can spend time for LRA and give your time and effort towards this organization, how you can balance that. So, our award winner comes from Anderson, South Carolina, a city of over 28,000 people, and also the hometown of the late Chadwick Boseman, the award-winning actor well known for playing the Marvel Comics superhero Black Panther. While growing up in this area, our award winner's love for exercise and travel began. She would spend time biking, building forts in the woods, reading under shady trees, and hiking. These interests became ways of life and continue today, where you can find her doing these same activities plus swimming, triathlon, adventure racing, snow skiing, see what I mean? Water skiing, and even encouraging friends. Can I go back? Yes, okay. And even encouraging friends to push their physical limits in beautiful locations around the world, if you can figure out who that is with her. This aspect of our award winner is key to understanding her drive and why she puts energy into this organization, as well as other professional endeavors. As she explained to me, I generally like trying anything that is personal or a professional challenge. I find large-scale multi-year research studies to be the ultimate challenge. I'm currently the PI on 3 research studies funded by the National Science Foundation. How many people say that? Okay. Our award winner is married and the parent of 3 children, 2 of which were adopted and have special needs. She loves being part of a large community of adopted families. Her entire family shares her love of travel and exercise, and her 3 children and parents saw her this summer complete the Ironman Chattanooga with her husband. And if you are unfamiliar with an Ironman, it consists of a 2.4-mile swim, a 116-mile bike ride, and a 26.2-mile run. As for her professional life, our award winner earned her undergraduate degree, as you can guess, Clemson University in elementary education with a minor in music. About her first year of teaching, she says, "I taught in a 4th grade classroom in rural South Carolina. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing." Raise your hand if that resonates with you. "And I was way out of my depth, both in terms of local culture and teaching ability. I realized I really needed to learn how to teach reading and felt like the world had been completely illuminated when I participated in a PD on the 4 blocks method of reading instruction during my first year of teaching. My interest in literacy development was ignited." She went on to pursue her PhD at Clemson and worked with David Ranking, a past president of LRA, where she began her line of research on digital innovations with a focus on providing equitable learning opportunities for all students that educators can, so that educators can prepare them for a future that is constantly changed by digital technologies. Although she has not been a classroom teacher for nearly 20 years, her research remains rooted in classroom practice, and her research still takes her to classrooms every week. For instance, every Tuesday she works with students in the arts and autism after-school program, which she considers to be the highlight of her professional week. As I mentioned, Dave Ranking introduced her to this organization during her doctoral studies, and she quickly distinguished herself in many ways as an integral member of the association. Her nomination letter explained, her vita lists 31 LRA NRC conference presentations, including papers, invited presentations, symposia, roundtables, and services discussant. Additionally, she won the Early Career Achievement Award in 2014. Clearly, she's been engaged in the conference over many years. She has also been engaged in the organization in extensive service. As you can see on this slide, you can see all of those formal service contributions. Her extraordinary knowledge of digital literacies has been called upon time and time again by LRA leaders to support the organization in ways such as lead the development of the new e-editor roles to enhance LRA's social media presence, provide extensive support for planning LRA's first ever virtual conference, work with the 2022 conference planning team to determine virtual options for LRA in the future. Sorry. When I asked her what she hoped for LRA, she said, "I hope LRA researchers will continue to envision and grow in how we support all people in becoming fully literate in a world that is constantly changed by digital technologies." This background provides context for understanding why this recipient is so deserving of this award. If you have not yet figured it out, this year's recipient of the Albert J. Kingston Award is Dr. Amy Hutchison.
Congratulations again, Amy. Finally, the reason why we're here. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Victoria Risco to introduce this evening's presidential speaker.
It is my pleasure to introduce Doris J. Walker Dalhouse. She is a longtime colleague of many of us and a professional who leads with integrity and a deeply felt caring for others and for the injustices that too often occur in our communities and public schools. Following is a brief summary of Doris's history and contributions to her profession. I ask you to read the longer version that's in our program, given my time limits. Doris received her PhD from The Ohio State University, and early in her career, Doris was honored when selected as a Lilly Foundation postdoctoral teaching fellow. Currently, Doris is a professor in the Department of Educational Policy and Leadership at Marquette University. Prior to Marquette, Doris was on the faculty of Minnesota State University Moorhead, Jackson State University, Bethune-Cookman, and she taught grades 5 and 6. Taking a social cultural perspective, Doris's research and advocacy focuses on equitable opportunities for students experiencing reading difficulties, refugee children and their families, students and families living in poverty, and children on the autism spectrum and their teachers. Doris often talks about the importance of seeing both the visible and the invisible assets of those we teach. And across her career, her work has... I didn't do that, I'm sure. Not sure where it came from. Do I dare speak again? Across her career, her work has been highly visible. She has held multiple leadership positions in national and international literacy associations, such as LRA, and local and regional and state councils as well. She has authored and co-authored multiple papers, chapters, and monographs, and all are in journals that we read all the time. Throughout her career, Doris has been a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion of all races, ethnicities, and nationalities. And this is evident in her professional leadership, her research, and her scholarly publications. Additionally, though, her works appear in places that aren't quite so visible, but equally impactful. As described by Toni Morrison, if you have some power, then your job is to empower others. I will describe briefly some of Doris's contributions that may be less visible, but definitely empowering. For example, while at Minnesota State Moorhead, Doris was the founder and leader of multiple faculty and task force groups working to assure diversity, equity, and retention of faculty and students. And while at Minnesota State University, she was invited to participate in a faculty exchange program. This program was located in a local public school in the Moorhead public school system, in which she was asked to teach 5th grade. She collaborated with teachers in the literacy block and also supported their literacy instruction. What was interesting about this appointment, though, is that she brought equity and diversity perspectives to a school that had no minority presence. At Moorhead, also, Doris served 4 years as the director of the Sudanese community-based reading clinic for K-6 students. We're going to learn more about this program as she talks about the work with refugee students. Currently at Marquette, Doris is principal research investigator on 2 funded projects examining literacy and social communication skills for children on the autism spectrum. Doris often talks about, as I mentioned, the importance of noticing both the visible and invisible assets of those we teach. And in a like manner, she affirms the visible and invisible assets of her colleagues, advisors, and students. Collaborating with Doris is a treasure to be celebrated. We give you Doris Walker Dalhouse.
Thank you, Vicki, for your kind words of introduction. I am honored that you accepted my invitation to support me in this way. I want to begin by acknowledging the presence of my loving and supportive husband of 46 years, Dr. A. Derek Dalhouse, who has been both a true partner in my work and in my life, and to acknowledge the efforts of my adult children, Yannick, daughter, and Jean-Pierre, son, who have each played significant roles in the preparation of the materials for my presidential address. I must thank the members of the Executive Committee and the Board of Directors for the accomplishments that we have made by working together during my presidential year. I am indeed grateful for the opportunity to have served as your LRA president and to have witnessed the commitment of so many of you to carrying out the mission of LRA. I want to express my appreciation for those of you who have played key roles in my professional development and LRA work by advising, encouraging, and responding to my requests for assistance. Lastly, as a proud alum of The Ohio State University, I must acknowledge the profound influence that Doctors Charlotte Huck, James E. Kerber, Victor Rental, and Alexander Frazier have had on my work. I honestly and sincerely thank them in absentia. Black bodies, white communities, and schools interrogating deficit perceptions of Sudanese refugee students. Social and economic changes have been shaped by voluntary and involuntary migration patterns. Voluntary migrations are associated with a desire for family unification, economic gain, and the pursuit of educational opportunities, while the reasons for involuntary migrations include fleeing from civil or political unrest, human rights violations, and war. Contentious discourses about immigration are fueled by arguments about the perceived impact of migrants on the demographics, social well-being, and economics of communities. At the core of anti-immigration rhetoric about who is included and who should be excluded are views that privilege one group above another in terms of desirability based on race, culture, and gender. The debates about which language, values, perspectives, and people belong in the United States extends beyond the boundaries of society, the door of schools, and the homes of the families served by the school community. Political discourses about immigration can adversely affect and influence the attitudes and beliefs of educators about voluntary and involuntary migrants, impact their teaching, and influence the educational experiences of these students in school settings. Black immigrants from African countries have been identified as being among the fastest growing population in the United States. With the increasing number of African immigrants who voluntarily and involuntarily migrate to the U.S., the issue of belongingness must be revisited, especially since these children continue to experience cultural, academic, and language challenges, which serve to marginalize and cause them to struggle with a sense of belonging, all while attempting to navigate an unfamiliar school environment. Groups of Black African refugees have experienced exclusion due to racism and othering in societies shaped by racialized histories. These exclusions due to race influence their interactions with peers, teachers, and in schools. Dominant public narratives about refugees presented in the media depict them as tragic victims in need of tremendous amounts of support or assistance, or as threats to society, which serve to disempower resettled refugees by ignoring their diverse cultural ways of knowing, agency, sense of control, and identity, and frame public perceptions of them. For example, the Lost Boys have been portrayed as coming from a situation beyond understanding and as vessels to be filled by U.S. material and culture. This is in contrast with how refugee youth see themselves, as found in research by Quinn and colleagues, that Sudanese youth who arrived in the United States as unaccompanied minors attributed having strong native cultural roots and a sense of identity that enabled them to make good choices, maintain focus, and avoid negative actions and behaviors. Thus, I am compelled to give voice to the stories of the Southern Sudanese who resettled in Fargo, North Dakota, because, as Margie Burns Knight so aptly expressed, each of us has a story to tell about our lives, our memories, and our dreams. Sharing our stories and listening to each other help us to understand who we are. Thus, my goal is to provide a historical chronicling of the experiences of Southern Sudanese Dinka refugees resettling in a hegemonically white community in the upper Midwestern U.S., and to examine the issues related to acculturation and education of Black African involuntary refugee students. There is a need to better understand the diversity of the experiences of those within and across populations with refugee backgrounds. I have chosen to begin my presidential talk with an AI-generated video using content from my research with Sudanese students and families to provide a context for understanding issues confronted by refugees in resettlement, and to lay a foundation for why and how we, as teachers and researchers, must interrogate hierarchies that prevent students who are marginalized because of their ethnic, racial, or migratory identities from achieving agency and literacy learning.
Approximately 17,000 refugees from southern Sudan reside in the U.S. These individuals, particularly the adult refugees who have experienced the effects of war, face numerous challenges in their resettlement journey. These challenges include poverty, stress, limited English language proficiency, and anxiety stemming from various factors. It is important to note that the impact of their experiences extends to their children as well, who often face their own set of difficulties and traumas. Many of these children have witnessed or experienced violence, displacement, and loss, which can have lasting psychological effects on their well-being. In the context of predominantly white communities such as Fargo, North Dakota, or other areas with limited diversity, it is worth considering the racial and ethnic makeup of these communities. The arrival of Sudanese refugees in such communities may present additional challenges related to cultural adaptation, integration, and a sense of belonging. Once enrolled in American schools, Sudanese children face numerous hurdles in adapting to a vastly different educational system. Language becomes a barrier, with English proficiency presenting a formidable obstacle to their academic progress. The cultural differences between their home country and the United States adds another layer of complexity. Classroom customs, teaching styles, and social dynamics are unfamiliar territory, often leaving Sudanese children feeling isolated and struggling to find their place. In the context of Sudanese families, parents have high expectations for their children's education. Education is seen as a pathway to a better future and a way to honor their sacrifices. Sudanese parents often emphasize the importance of academic achievement and encourage their children to excel in their studies. In the home environment, literacy practices are also important. Sudanese parents use storytelling as a traditional way of passing down cultural values, morals, and history to their children. It serves as a means of preserving their cultural heritage and instilling a sense of identity. Sudanese children demonstrate determination and resilience as they participate in language acquisition programs, ESL classes, and seek support from teachers and specialists. Their experiences emphasize the importance of addressing the unique needs of immigrant and refugee students in American schools.
A river of strangers in search of a place to be free, to live and laugh, to love again, in search of a place where bombs did not fall, where people did not die on their way to market. A river of people in search of peace. In 2021, a total of 12,500 refugees were resettled in the US, and more than 25,000 refugees were resettled in 2022. In fact, in the past 50 years, 3 million refugees have resettled in the US. And I was one of them. My name is Daniel, and it may help you to understand what it means to be a refugee if you hear my story. I am originally from the Bori-speaking group who live at the southern tip of Sudan, next to the border with Uganda. I wanted to become a priest, and I received a scholarship to earn an MA in divinity at the University of Kenya. The scholarship paid for my tuition and housing. I had to apply to Khartoum, the capital city of Sudan, to get permission to leave Sudan to go to Kenya. But for 3 months, I was turned down. I eventually had to pay a man 2,000 Sudanese pounds to get the documents for my family. I was told by the man that I had to leave Sudan in 2 days. At the end of my studies in Kenya, I had to choose between going back to Sudan or surrendering to the UN as a refugee. I chose the latter and was sent to a refugee camp in Kenya. While in the refugee camp, I applied to go to the US as a refugee, but I was told by seminary leaders that the US was not a good place to go to with my family because of gangs and crime. I almost stopped the process of going to the US, but I knew that living in Sudan and the refugee camp wasn't good either, so I decided to be adventurous. I was eventually accepted as a refugee, and I left the refugee camp in Kenya to travel to the US. As an Anglican priest, the Episcopal Diocese of North Dakota and the Lutheran Refugee Foundation sponsored me and my family to go to Fargo, North Dakota. My wife, 7 kids, and I became the first large Sudanese refugee family to arrive in Fargo. I soon figured out that the school system here in the US was quite different from what I knew back in Sudan. You see, I had previously attended school in Uganda, which was a British colony at the time, and like most British colonies, they followed the British education system. Matriculation exams, created by professors at Cambridge or Oxford University, were sent to the colonies where students took them. Subsequently, the completed exams were sent back to Cambridge or Oxford for grading, with results typically returning after 3 months. However, most children in rural South Sudan never went to school because there were few schools in the area and there was a shortage of teachers. Churches facilitated evening literacy schools to help educate children in the rural areas, but many rural South Sudanese did not go to school until they moved to Khartoum. Additionally, individuals in South Sudan did not like school because the Khartoum government switched to Arabic as the language of instruction and rewrote history books, falsely claiming that all Sudanese grandparents were from Arabia. However, the black South Sudanese knew this wasn't true and did not want their children to learn false information. In fact, for Sudanese to learn English, they had to leave Sudan. In contrast to the United States, in Uganda and Sudan, children are required to repeat a grade level until they are ready to move to the next level. It does not matter what their age is. My first daughter was placed in 6th grade in the US based on her age, even though she was performing at the 2nd grade level. Her poor English skills created a gap between her knowledge and performance compared to that of her classmates. However, like other Sudanese parents, we emphasize the importance of education to our children, and our daughter worked hard in order to catch up with her classmates. Unfortunately, our only contact with our children's teachers in America is at parent-teacher conferences. And immigrant parents who have several children may not be able to attend the parent-teacher conferences for all their children. When we do get to meet with our children's teachers at parent-teacher conferences, they tell us that we need to work with our children at home, but they do not tell us how to help them. They assume refugee parents understand how to help their children navigate the foreign educational system, despite the many differences. Additionally, Sudanese refugees come to the US with little money, forcing us to take multiple low-paying and often labor-intensive and dangerous jobs to support our family. For example, I once had a job removing asbestos. By the time many of us get home, we are exhausted, so we do not have the energy to do anything with our children. Sometimes, teachers send home notes about our children, but these notes tend to only focus on the negative things. We fear our children reading these notes because it can lead to them disliking the teacher. I believe starting the note with the children's strengths before addressing weaknesses would help both the children and Sudanese parents better understand and accept the feedback. We need teachers to understand that our children are our future. Help us so we can help them thrive in this unfamiliar place where we are separated from our homeland's culture and face new challenges daily. We need teachers and schools to work with us. As is said in our culture, when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. And we don't want our children to suffer.
Daniel's experiences as a refugee speaks to the struggle of one refugee, while other testimonials, which are forms of public witnessing of traumatic events, speak to the atrocities of the Sudanese wars experienced by other Southern Sudanese. Escape from Slavery is a biography of Francis Bach's true story of being captured as a 10-year-old Dinka boy during a raid by Muslims on his village and forced into slavery to a wealthy Arab farmer for 10 years, thereby documenting a contemporary form of slavery experienced by Southern Sudanese. After enduring multiple beatings for attempting to escape and imprisonment for talking against the government by sharing his experiences with others in the refugee camp at Khartoum, Bach was eventually resettled to Fargo, North Dakota, with the assistance of the United Nations. His story is truly compelling as he describes his experiences and informs readers of the plight of Dinka boys who were forced to be educated as Muslims and then trained as child soldiers to fight against their own people. The testimonies of the different experiences of the lost boys of Sudan are captured in Courageous Journey, Walking the Lost Boys from the Sudan to America, and in The Long Walk to Water, a fictionalized but actual depiction of the real-life experiences of Salva Dutt, who founded a nonprofit organization that dug wells to provide clean water for Dinka and Nuer communities in Sudan. The last book, When Elephants Fight, provides the reader with a realistic picture of the life of a child living in war. Southern Sudanese were resettled in the United States during the 1900s. The Second Sudanese Civil War lasted for 22 years, beginning in 1983 and ending in 2005. So as a result of this interest, I then have identified 3 guiding questions that I looked at in my presentation. How can teacher educators prepare pre-service teachers to engage in transformative pedagogy connected to a humanizing view of Sudanese Dinka background refugee students? What might transformative literacy instruction that meets the educational needs of African background refugee students include? Then what can educators learn from African refugee parents that can promote their children's literacy learning and increase parent engagement in school environments? As I indicated, the Second Sudanese Civil War lasted for 22 years, beginning in 1983 and ending in 2005. The war, which started in southern Sudan, has been designated as one of the longest wars in history. Southern Sudan became independent of Northern Sudan in 2011, 6 years after the end of the war. Northern Sudanese identify as Arabs and Muslims, while the Southern Sudanese identify as Black, African, and Christian. In the early 2000s, Sudanese refugees comprised 60% of the African refugees resettled in the United States. There were 3 waves of migration of Sudanese refugees, with one starting in the mid-1950s and a second wave in the 1980s. The third wave of Sudanese migration began in 2013. Conflict continues to rage in Sudan, with the latest conflict between 2 military factions, the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces, who are vying for power. As a result, 3 million Sudanese were uprooted over a 3-month period in 2013, according to the International Organization for Migration. African-born immigrants have higher levels of education and are among the better educated immigrant populations in the United States. Most Black immigrants are likely to either migrate to the U.S. as refugees or be granted asylum upon entry to the country. Nevertheless, there is a lack of understanding of the depth and rich backgrounds of experiences that African-born immigrant students bring to their classrooms and schools, and parents' roles in supporting their children's academic achievement. The premise of my talk is that refugee children are not a homogeneous group. So not all students with refugee backgrounds need the same kind or form of literacy instruction. Thus, I assert that from my research and that of other scholars, Southern Sudanese Dinkas are not all the same and therefore need differentiated literacy instruction. Although Dinka families practice the same cultural traditions and have similar expectations for their children, they differ in their ability to assist in educating them. African-born immigrants, and specifically Southern Sudanese Dinka students with refugee backgrounds, need teachers who both see and teach them. My connection to the Dinka Sudanese community began during my time as a member of Gethsemane Episcopal Cathedral in Fargo and lasted during the 26 years that I called the Fargo Moorhead Community Home. Episcopal churches in Minnesota and North Dakota and Lutheran Social Services of North Dakota worked cooperatively to bring Sudanese refugees to Fargo during the second wave of Sudanese migration. As Daniel described his journey to Fargo, the Southern Sudanese arrived in a cold and snowy city, very different from the tropical climate in their homeland. In fact, the state of North Dakota is designated as the second coldest state in the continental U.S., with January temperatures averaging 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Local churches assisted in the resettlement of the Sudanese with preschool educational programs, the search for employment, as well as in providing the Sudanese with needed clothing, housing, and transportation. Through my involvement in my church's outreach effort, I became acquainted with several of the Southern Sudanese families, and more accurately and acutely aware of the educational needs and challenges faced by their children in adjusting to schools in the Fargo-Moorhead area. I was motivated by a desire to better understand their plight and to respond by involving my pre-service teachers in an effort to meet the literacy needs of the children. In her book entitled Racing Fargo, Refugee Citizenship and the Transformation of Small Cities, Jennifer Erickson provides an ethnographic recording of the issues of Sudanese resettlement, belonging, and race in Fargo from the 1980s through 2020. Racing means analyzing a history of race alongside contemporary approaches to diversity. For example, how refugee resettlement disrupted the discourse and misrecognition of race in terms of physical attributes: white, non-white, language, English, not English, religion, Christian, not Christian, nation, us, them, and sociality, nice, not nice. Over the period of her research, Erickson found that the Southern Sudanese used spiritual, social, political, and digital technologies of citizenship. The forms of citizenship of the Sudanese gained respect for them in Fargo and in South Sudan. However, Erickson said that despite all the citizenship technologies of the Sudanese, they could not be separated from their blackness in a white city, and by their presence continued to challenge conceptions of who belonged in Fargo. During the 1980s, between 100 to 250 Southern Sudanese were resettled per year. The number more than doubled to 572 in 1992, resulting in resistance and increasingly negative attitudes being expressed by Fargoans. Despite the local and vocal opposition to resettlement, Lutheran Social Services continued its resettlement efforts. From 1997 through 2015, 7,404 of the Sudanese were resettled in Fargo, which was approximately 400 per year. Local school administrators in Fargo became more opposed to the resettlement of refugees because they believed that they were not being informed about the true number of refugees arriving, which prevented them from doing the planning necessary to accommodate the number of students who might arrive. In 2001, 800 Southern Sudanese resettled in Fargo, and among them were 40 lost boys and lost girls. The Dinkas, who comprised the largest ethnic group in Southern Sudan, represented the majority of Sudanese who resettled in Fargo. English was their primary language, spoken by the Dinkas, and is the primary language spoken among formally educated Southern Sudanese. Arabic, or Juba Arabic, a Creole form of Arabic, are also forms of language spoken by Southern Sudanese. Despite the differences between the Southern Sudanese who arrived in Fargo, they had three things in common. The first commonality identified by Erickson was their blackness in a white city in a country where skin color shapes access to power, authority, safety, and everyday life. The second major commonality among the Southern Sudanese was their Christianity, which reflected their resistance against Islamization and Arabization by Northern Sudanese. And the last was their employment in low-wage jobs in factories, as Daniel described, and healthcare facilities as aides, or in hotels as workers. To further conceptualize my talk, I must describe the local community and state in which the Southern Sudanese were resettled. Fargo, North Dakota, is located on the eastern edge of the Great Plains and in the Red River Valley, where the Red River runs north into Manitoba, Canada. The Red River forms the border between North Dakota and Minnesota. Fargo is bordered on the east by the state of Minnesota, with Moorhead, Minnesota being the closest and largest city in northwestern Minnesota. Erickson's description of the white people of Fargo during the 20th century provides insight into the environment in which Sudanese families found themselves. She describes the white people as especially friendly and hardworking Americans who were bolstered by their perception of their productivity in supporting the healthy economy of Fargo, the small city which it was considered to be. With the arrival and resettlement of the increasing numbers of refugees, race began to shape whites' perceptions about belonging, work, and friendliness, and their understanding of citizenship. Being white and friendly were seen as mechanisms for maintaining power, privilege, and status. To change the focus of being a refugee as the single most important part of their identities, Newcomer and colleagues in 2021 and others promote the use of the term refugee background students and not refugees to emphasize the multifaceted aspects of their lives. In an editorial volume of JLR, which focused on problems associated with labels, Bauer, Lee, and Rasfar in 2022 also cautioned literacy educators and researchers about the use of the label, such as refugee, in educational contexts because of the impact that it has on the literacy learning experiences and the lifelong humanity of these students. Countering deficit perceptions is dependent on the use of asset discourse, defined by Shapiro and McDonald as discourses that emphasize the resources and strategies that refugee background students employ toward the goals both inside and outside of educational settings. Assets can be identified in the oral and written narratives of refugee background students and in the examples from their lived experiences. Therefore, there are two deficits frequently used to describe African children with refugee backgrounds and their parents, and I would like to interrogate those. They are that the linguistic abilities of African children, Southern Sudanese, with refugee backgrounds limit their success in U.S. schools, and two, that African Southern Sudanese Dinka refugee parents are unable or are limited in their ability to support the literacy development of their children. Deficit one. Deficit views of Dinka children, their families, and their language and literacy is present in most of the research involving them. While many Southern Sudanese refugees' first schooling experience was in refugee camps or due to limited access to schooling in Sudan, children and youth in refugee camps are more likely to be literate in English than in Dinka. In interviews with Sudanese leaders in Fargo, I learned that many Southern Sudanese students come to U.S. schools knowing two or more languages, Arabic, their tribal language, and some English. The exception is children who are from rural Sudan who have not attended school. Those Southern Sudanese children who learned Arabic before coming to the U.S. are better able to learn English and perform better in school than those who know only their tribal language. Southern Sudanese refugee background students, like other immigrant and refugee children, play a vital role in families by serving as literacy and cultural brokers for their parents. Newcomers, Kalova, Hughes, and Wayne, found that Southern Sudanese refugee background students who resettled in Western New York internalized the unique methods of storytelling, such as remembered and repeated storytelling and storytelling using performance nuances in their homes, and the children view them as culturally as well as linguistically sustaining practices. However, the forms of storytelling used in their home were not valued in their school environment. The language and literacy challenges that the students face do not represent a lack of intelligence, but are reflective of the mismatch between their home and literacies as practice and school language and literacy practices. Sudanese parents in my research expressed concerns about teachers' perceptions of their children's language and the way that teachers viewed them because of their language. They said, the teachers' expectations of our Sudanese children are low because they are refugees, and refugees are seen as not being too smart because they don't speak English well and do not understand concepts explained by the teachers as quickly as the students who grew up speaking English. Parents attributed the reasons for this to racial stereotypes related to skin color and to academic ability. Students who are multilingual possess assets that can be used to help them, the students with different levels of English proficiency and first language skills, to improve their English language skills. Code switching among students who are acquiring English should be encouraged and seen as an opportunity for language engagement and not as demonstrating a lack of English proficiency. English language development for all ELLs, RELs, not only ELs from refugee backgrounds, benefit from intense daily instruction in English, combined with content learning. This will provide the needed support for meeting their language needs and promote greater engagement in learning. It is very important that while students are being in the process engaged in developing proficiency in English, that their existing linguistic repertoires are valued and seen as the connecting links to their identities, families, and communities. Deficit 2, refugee resettled families value education for their children and recognize the value associated with literacy. School performance and the well-being of students for all students, regardless of places of origin, are associated with positive family, community, and school relationships. Social factors such as bullying and low teacher expectation and unrealistic expectation of parent involvement can adversely affect both children's and parents' acculturation. Nevertheless, Sudanese refugee youth have been found to demonstrate educational resilience or achieve successful educational outcomes despite the adversities encountered in their lives. In an investigation of the educational resilience of Sudanese unaccompanied minors residing in foster care, Rana and colleagues found that the respondents identified, quote, getting an education as their primary goal, and attributed their success overcoming the challenges influenced in U.S. schools to their personal attributes, to their relationships, and to community support. Sudanese parents interviewed in my co-authored study entitled, "When Two Elephants Fight, the Grass Suffers," identified their roles in communicating their expectation for their children as being that of encourager, supporters, and models of literacy, disciplinarians, providers, and cultural historians. As one of the parents of the three families said, Sudanese youth who have come to the United States since the civil war in Sudan have had to transition from an oral to a reading culture. Consistent with research by Dryden Peterson, parents acknowledged that their school experience differed in the curriculum and instructional methods, such as storytelling and memorization of Bible or religious passages, from that of their children in Fargo, which made it difficult for them to assist in their children with schoolwork. Parents took pride in their roles as cultural historians with the responsibility for sharing their early life experiences in Africa, as well as the history of their people, sharing African stories and songs at bedtime, and showing pictures of their homeland were their means of preserving the history that binds them as a family and a people. So parents had expectations for teachers and expressed their desire to work with teachers. And among the things they suggested were to have high expectations for Sudanese children, know their level of English proficiency, provide additional time for learning, avoid labeling them as learning disabled during their resettlement period, differentiate instruction, pacing and content, and assessing regularly their children's understanding of content. According to Sarub and others, teachers can help students to embrace school literacy by supporting the multiple literacies students already practice by making across-text and across-content connections. In the context of U.S. schools that ethnic minorities and refugee background students have been found to experience a greater risk of lower social, psychological, and academic adjustments in comparison to their native-born counterparts. The depth of African-born immigrant and refugee parents' marginalization in schools is great, and information about African children is rarely examined in educational research. Opportunities for parent participation and to be involved in decision-making are also limited. In an ethnographic study in which Kayamo and Bakuza investigated Southern Sudanese parents' efforts to be engaged in their children's school, the researchers found that with the assistance of community organizations, resettlement agencies, and with community refugee leaders, the parents were able to engage in space making, a process in which transnational migrants make spaces for themselves within, between, and outside of existing policies, practices, assumptions, and expectations. The parents challenged normative discourses and systemic actions and persisted in demanding that their children be heard and their issues shared. So they became advocates for children and thereby repositioned themselves as being capable parents, educators, and decision makers with knowledge and authority, which led to documented changes in school-based decision policies. Although building relationships with refugee families across differences in language, culture, and other forms of diversity has been recognized as difficult, the benefits for the social and emotional health of their children and their academic achievement are clear. Now, I would like to turn my attention to the issue of what it means for the preparation for teaching Black, African, Dinka children and youth with refugee backgrounds. Literature pertaining to the preparation of pre-service teachers to meet the academic and social needs of refugee children is lacking. Research by Covington indicates that there are gaps in beginning teachers' knowledge about who refugees are and how best to support them in the classroom. Multiple multicultural courses, field experiences, and the infusion of content on diversity in the teacher preparation curriculum have been used to develop pre-service teachers' multicultural understandings. Pre-service teachers and teachers need to be able to have empathy for the children they will teach and their families and communities. Guiding educators in a process of perspective taking has been proposed as a way of promoting the knowing and reasoning needed by them to teach in culturally responsive and humanizing ways. The use of drama-based informal learning opportunities that incorporate creative activities in art, music, and drama has also been proposed as another means to both inform pre-service teachers about the experiences of refugees and to promote a readiness for teaching refugee background students in creative ways. Little research has been conducted about veteran teachers who work with students from refugee backgrounds. However, the research conducted supports the use of two frameworks, culturally responsive and humanizing pedagogical frameworks, are recommended to use in planning for refugee background students and in guiding researchers in analyzing the experiences of these students. Culturally sustaining pedagogy, an extension of culturally responsive pedagogy, recognizes the fluid dynamics of culture and promotes a consistent critical view of pedagogical practices that are multilinguistic and multicultural in nature. Academic achievement, cultural competence, and critical competence are the central components of culturally responsive teaching. Humanizing pedagogy, which is based on Fierre's work, has similar tenets to those of culturally responsive frameworks. Both frameworks recognize the socio-political context that impacts the lives of teachers and students, examines the impact of the perspectives, beliefs, and cultural practices of teachers and students on instruction and student learning, and emphasize the importance of engaging in partnerships with families in order to learn about and use students' funds of knowledge as resources for teaching and learning. According to COVID-10, teachers and future teachers who do not know a family's experience prior to arrival in a new country cannot guess how these experiences affect the child's and parents' reactions to school. Interacting with families during home visits can be an effective practice of learning about families' experiences. Develop asset-based perspectives of their diverse cultural, linguistic, and minoritized backgrounds, and support culturally responsive, sustaining teaching pedagogies. This knowledge can help teachers to create classroom communities that affirm refugee background students, that demonstrate an ethos of care, which includes patience, flexibility, and empathy for students, providing appropriate language supports, building students' self-confidence, and advocating to meet their needs. Creating learning opportunities outside of the formal school classroom setting is another effective way to learn about and from students with refugee backgrounds. In another co-authored study, I reported on my pre-service teachers' involvement in a community-based embedded literacy method scores field experience. The goals of the Sudanese Reading Clinic, funded by the Otto Bremer Foundation and held in the basement of a local Episcopal church where Daniel was the minister, were to help pre-service teachers to develop a socio-cultural stance toward assessing and interpreting the reading performance of elementary age 6-12 refugee background students, to use assessment data in instructional planning, to address their literacy needs, and to employ research-based instructional strategies in improving their reading and writing skills. Pre-service teachers reported that the clinic experience increased their knowledge of self, the students, and refugee background students' needs, as evidenced by pre-post scores on the knowledge dimension of an assessment of culturally relevant beliefs and post-evaluations of the experience. Education must be transformed to meet the needs of Sudanese children. According to noted educator James Banks, transformative education is needed to empower minoritized students. I propose the following to transform literacy instruction for African Sudanese Dinka students with refugee backgrounds. 1, establishing community partnerships with organizations that work with refugee families and children to provide literacy opportunities both in school and in after-school programs. 2, working with school systems to propose holistic curriculum, which includes content and the experiences of students with refugee backgrounds. 3, incorporating Dinka family values as reflected in their home teaching. And some of those values include cultural beliefs about belonging to a collective community, showing respect for elders by being reflective, watching and actively listening, and showing, telling, and experiencing everyday life experiences rather than teaching them to their children. And incorporating these principles and values into their instructional routines can both promote literacy engagement, teach literacy concepts, and establish positive teacher-student and student-student relationships. 4, using pedagogical approaches that are based on how parents interact and teach concepts to Dinka children. These include, by first, observation, physically helping, verbally helping, and then embedded in narratives that explain content when addressing them and teaching their children. And lastly, using children and adolescent literature that engages students in critical conversations about socio-political issues, drama, as well as belonging. To help teachers in selecting books about refugees, Strekalova, Hughes, and Peterman recommend that teachers engage in critical self-reflection designed to improve or to investigate their personal beliefs about refugees, including the meaning of the term, their experiences with them, and the impact they have on the interpretation of stories about them. While books interpreting and depicting their journey to safety and resettlement in a new place are a good beginning point for exploring the global issue of the refugee experience, educators must avoid texts that overemphasize the dangers associated with the journey of refugees and their resettlement process and experiences. Those that can lead to distortion of refugees' experiences and create potential biased representation of them should be avoided. Critical conversations about socio-political issues should follow the reading of the text and the sharing of personal stories related to trauma. Pedagogies of testimony and critical witnessing, which is interrogating the systemic oppressions implicated in the students' lives and experiences and interpreting these experiences, are pedagogies that can be used effectively in literacy classrooms to respond to trauma, as Dutroux has shared with us many times in her writing. Lastly, the issue of belongingness should be examined in the content and text used with Southern Sudanese refugee background students like Kamar and others. I recommend using a critical literacy lens to investigate the way in which the journey and resettlement experiences of Southern Sudanese children with refugee backgrounds are depicted in children and adolescent literature, and support the use of materials to disrupt common perceptions or stereotypes of them, interrogate multiple viewpoints about feelings and their feelings of belonging in a resettled country and their ambivalence toward their ties to their home country, and also address social political issues related to resettlement. Identity texts, as Zaidi and Shar have shared in their writing, can also be used as an intervention tool to increase self-awareness, build trust, enhance belongingness, and create an awareness of a shared humanity. I believe that schools must prioritize refugee students' personal histories and current needs, and their heritage to humanize their educational experiences and become and promote student engagement. Teachers must move beyond acknowledging the existence of racism in society and must be purposeful in the methods and materials used in their classrooms to combat it. School policies must be implemented to ensure that Sudanese and other refugee children's parents are welcomed and assisted in their efforts to be involved in their children's education. In conclusion, as I have demonstrated throughout this talk, we as researchers have responsibility to interrogate hierarchies about all refugees, but particularly African refugees, by examining their unique experience of those who are unaccompanied minors. The educational experience of refugee and immigrant ELL or EL students with interrupted formal schooling. Looking at and examine the language of refugee children and ways to support their literacy development. And also, not eliminating others, but to prepare pre-service teachers and teachers to work with refugee background children and families. So drawing on my adaptation of text in Jacqueline Woodson's book entitled The Day You Began, I would like for us to remember, there will be times when you walk into a room and no one there is quite like you. When the world feels like a place you are standing all the way outside of, until the day you began to share your story, and I would add, and bear witness to the stories of those who are not quite like you. And all at once, in the room where no one else is quite like you, the world opens itself up a little wider to make some space for everyone. Let us commit to opening up the world for the stories that still need to be told. Thank you.
Thanks again to Doris for your inspiring words. Please join us for the President's reception in the Galleria to continue tonight's conversations. Thank you for joining tonight.